we're going to jettison that
uses
trunk.
Draco thrusters on the spacecraft will use primarily the forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, and which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to apogee, or the highest point of Earth's current orbit around the Earth. Once it starts. The deorbit burn will alter Dragon's path to primarily the floor located on the to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and is executed at the coast of Florida, or the highest splashdown today is planned for around the Earth. This deorbit burn will alter Dragon's path to ultimately line it up to re-enter p.m. Eastern Earth's atmosphere, and splashdown
began
off the
a
coast
little
of
differently than usual.
Splashdown today is planned for 2:57 p.m. Pacific or 5:57 p.m.
when Nick
Eastern.
Hague and Alexander
Crew
Gorbanov
9 mission
arrived
began
in the
a little
Crew 9
differently than
spacecraft
usual
in September.
since
Butch Wilmore and Sonny arrived were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov arrived incorporated into the space station Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station, along with the other crew members. Fully incorporated. Additionally, Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition and began research and other work aboard the station,
And after
along
successful
with the other crew
liftoff
members.
and separation from
Additionally,
Falcon
Williams
9,
commanded
Nick
the
and
orbiting
Alexander
laboratory
made
for
a short
much of the
flight on
expedition.
board Dragon to the International Space Station in separation from Falcon 9. Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station in September. Both veterans of long having had the capacity to leave the station at any point, and Wilmore conducted some type of emergency during their 9 months began packing for their having had the capacity to leave the station at any point. Had there been some type of emergency, the crew shared lessons learned for their newly arrived about a week ago, and arrived just a few days ago, and shared lessons learned with the newly arrived
NASA and SpaceX
who arrived just a few days ago.
With the United States for return operations such as this, NASA and SpaceX closely and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, safety zone, as well as public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, are issued to as well as in advance of and during spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to mariners in advance of and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones.
Now, we do want to stress to the public the need to respect this recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous task, and any other boats interfering to the astronauts risk to the astronauts working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. For the safety of the crew and your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we'll be bringing you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
And they will be the best
homecoming
that you can get. They will be the best views that you can get. Meet our returning crew. Let's take a minute. U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick Hague is your U.S. Space Force Colonel Nick. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2013. He was selected by NASA as an astronaut in flight to the International Space Station and third space flight to the International Space Station. He spent 171 days in space with Crew 9 and has a career total of 309 and has a career total of during his mission. He completed a spacewalk with astronaut Sonny Williams. He completed a spacewalk. That was his fourth astronaut, earning him a career total. That was his 25 hours, earning him a career total of 25 hours, 56 minutes of spacewalking time. He previously served as a crew member of Expedition 59 and 60 Expedition 59 and 60 back in 2019. He flew with Alexei Ovchinin and NASA's Christina Koch. So this is his with second time sharing the space station with Ovchinin. Christina Koch. The Kansas native is a test pilot of a distinguished sharing the space station and a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. The Kansas native is a test pilot of a spent 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force from the United States Air Force to 5 months in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And is an active colonel. He voluntarily transferred from the United States Air Force to U.S. Space Force in 2021. They have 2 sons. And is an active colonel. NASA astronaut Sonny Williams is a mission specialist for Crew 9. This was her third visit to the NASA astronaut Sonny Williams originally launched a Boeing Starliner spacecraft and arrived at the space station on June 6th. She originally launched beginning to get some views inside the spacecraft, arrived at the space station on shoulders of the crew and on board Dragon. Will continue to bring you those inside the spacecraft today, overlooking the shoulders of the crew on board Dragon. Or continue to bring you those views to jump back into a little bit more about Sonny. She became an Expedition 71, 72
remember. And she logged to jump back into a little bit more about Sunny. She became an Expedition 7172 crew member, and she logged 286 days, the second most time in space by a U.S. astronaut. She actually has a total of former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson ranks first for the U.S. the second most time in space by a U.S. astronaut. Former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson has completed 9 over the course of her career for a total of 62 hours and has completed 9 over the course of her career on the list of cumulative time spacewalking by a female astronaut. And she has flown on 4 different spacecraft types on the list including the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. And she has flown on 4 different spacecraft types, including the Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now Dragon. And again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012. She's a retired U.S. Navy captain and is a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. Previously, she served on Expedition 14 and 15 in 2006 and 2007, and again with Expedition 32 and 33 in 2012.
Just like Sunny,
she's a retired U.S. Navy captain and is a proud graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy.
And completed 5 over the course of his career, earning him a total spacewalking time of 21 hours 2 minutes. This is his third spaceflight, and just like Sunny, his career, 286 days in space, Starliner, and now Dragon. One spacewalk, and previously the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served on STS-129 in 2009, and Expedition 41 on 4 different spacecraft types throughout his career. The Space Shuttle, Soyuz, Starliner, and now retired. Previously, the Mount Juliet, Tennessee native served
Alexander
on
Gorbanov is a third mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew 9 was his very first spaceflight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space over the course of his career. Gorbanov and Alexander Gorbanov is a third mission specialist serving on today's mission. Crew 9 was his very first spaceflight to the space station, earning him a total of 171 days in space before his cosmonaut selection in 2018. Gorbanov worked as an engineer for 4 visiting vehicles and saw the departure of 4 spacecraft launches. The duo orbited the Earth more than 2,700 times during their mission. Before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, Gorbanov worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan.
From the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon upcoming events. Dragon is currently doing a couple of things during the re-entry phase. First, Dragon is also initiating separation of loops from the radiator, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connection between the spacecraft Dragon and the trunk. Very comfortable in preparation for that Butch and Alexander during the re-entry phase. Now, Dragon is also initiating separation of hoping to get more views inside of the Dragon data, power, and fluid connection between the spacecraft and the trunk. But now a bit more of the Dragon Freedom capsule. It has flown on several missions for NASA. We are hoping to get more views inside of the Dragon capsule. 2022. Bring those, of course, we want to see more to the International Space Station on NASA. But now a bit more of the Dragon Freedom capsule. It has flown on several missions for NASA. It first launched April 27, 2022 in May 2023 the International Space Station on NASA's SpaceX Crew 4 mission. And of course, subsequently Crew 9 launched last year is September 28 for Axiom Space. A little bit about the Dragon Freedom capsule in May 2023 and Axiom Mission 3 once again January of 2024. The shoulders and of course Commander Nick Hague, who last year on the left-hand side of your screen there, and mission specialist a little bit about the Dragon Freedom capsule. Here, a view that we have.
And the next major milestone that we're looking ahead towards this afternoon is claw separation. We're targeting that claw separation at 2:05 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon, so less than 10 minutes from now. Continuing to get some views inside and the next major milestone that we're looking ahead towards this afternoon is claw separation. And as you can see, the claw separation at 2:05 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon, so less than 10 minutes from now. When they launch, when they dock, inside Dragon Freedom, return back for splashdown. Left there is NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore, and as you can see, the crew is suited up in their space just prior to deorbit burn. They are suited up, and you'll hear us dynamic some of those communications happen. That's when they dock, when they undock, make sure that we are relaying the best information to you all, and so that you hear it as well. So if you do hear us pause about putting their visors down, that will happen just prior to deorbit burn. And I know that gloves are pretty unique when some of those communications happen. That's because we want to make sure ensure that we are relaying the best information to you all, and so that you hear it as well. So if you do hear us pause, that is what we're doing. You also see they have their gloves on there, and I know the gloves are pretty unique on the Dragon spacesuits, right? They're custom created.
But that view we saw earlier overall is custom fit Alexander Gorbanov and Nick Hague. That is a touch screen. It allows the crew to the touch screen panels that they have that Dragon is doing along with those. We can't see it from this view, but that view we saw earlier. So yeah, the spacesuit Alexander Gorbanov is intended to act as a touch screen. It allows the crew as once the visors are closed, everything that Dragon is doing along with a pressure in the unlikely event of a depressurization event. The spacesuit itself is intended to act as a mini spaceship, if you will, as we've got the location tracker as well as on the left-hand side, it's mapping out the operations that Dragon is executing. The crew has to remain well informed. There we can see those screens I was talking about. Dragon is doing autonomously. That basically means that Dragon is as well as on the left-hand side. It's mapping out the operations that Dragon is executing. But the crew has to remain well informed to bring itself all these things that Dragon is doing autonomously. That basically means that Dragon is flying itself. The crew has the ability to control the capsule if necessary, but the capsule is essentially going to bring itself home. But of course, in order to be familiar with...
So we did hear that call out for the deorbit sequence start to begin here in 5 minutes. That call from the ground came from the core, or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne, Mission Control just behind us, and that went up to Commander Nick Hague. So we did hear that call out for the majority of the communications during in 5 minutes. Flight downhill from the ground came from the core, or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne. Now we did mention that they are flying on Crew Dragon Commander Nick Hague. He's going to be doing spacecraft majority of the communications during the human downhill program through Splashdown. This is a nod to Alan Shepard naming his spacecraft Freedom 7 during the Mercury program. So they are flying on the crew that Freedom flew up on the naming of a few years ago had the opportunity to name this Dragon in the human spaceflight program. This is a nod to Alan Shepard naming his spacecraft Freedom 7 during the Mercury program. Mission 2 and 3. So the crew, and then of course today flew up on Freedom a few years ago had the opportunity to name this Dragon, and they named it Freedom. That was Crew 4 that Sandra was the first flyers on this spacecraft. It's also flown for Axiom Mission 2 and 3, and then of course today for Crew 9 as well.
The third daytime splashdown. So there's particular capsule of particular capsule that gets that Sandra just mentioned. Nighttime is great because we can see for even more clearly the capsule streaking through. But I personally love the daylight views. Daytime really get so there's even better views of the recovery team operation that gets during that daytime splashdowns.
Yes, absolutely. And if you follow along with our missions, you'll know that sometimes weather is a watch item when it comes to undocking and splashdown. We do splashdown in the water, so we want to ensure that parameters like wave heights and wind speeds and precipitation, lightning, all of that. Yes, absolutely. And if you follow along with our missions, you'll know that sometimes weather is a watch item when it comes to undocking and splashdown. We do splashdown in the water, so we want to ensure that parameters like wave heights and wind speeds and precipitation, lightning, all of that is looking good for the crew and the safety of those recovery personnel. And today the weather is just pristine. We got off of space station on the very first attempt. So I'm joking around and saying that it was because it was St. Patrick's Day and we got really lucky with the weather.
Before we enter the period of loss of signal of weather, we will be hearing from an entry briefing from the core, the Crew Operations Resource Engineer, and they will deliver important information like typically updated before we enter the period of loss of signal or LOS, as well as we will hear an entry briefing from the core, the so we'll be standing by to listen in on those, and they will deliver important information like shortly after, typically after splashdown and loss of signal chunk separation, as well as before the wave height and wind speed. So we'll be standing by to listen in. Hearing all of that coming from, like I said, that individual is shortly there in the room. Typically after that is SpaceX mission separation. I can't quite remember if it's before or after deorbit burn. That room is located just over our shoulders. In any case, we'll be hearing all of that where Dragon operators in fact, that individual is seated there in the room, monitoring the progress of Dragon as it continues SpaceX mission its way home in Hawthorne, California. That room is located just over our shoulders, and that is where Dragon operators are standing by from the International Space Station, monitoring the progress of Dragon as it continues its way way home. Control. There are multiple teams, in fact, and they cycle at the point of splashdown. It'll be to ensure that everybody gets hours the required Dragon undocked periods, just like the Space Station on board. The team there in that mission crew operations and resource engineer is seated there are multiple teams in the room, and that, like Sandra said, is the primary voice to ensure that everybody gets the required rest and the SpaceX team just like the astronauts on board.
That's right, and so it looks like we're about 3 minutes or so from the claw separation portion of today's flight. The claw is a portion on the spacecraft that holds the trunk to Dragon. Following claw separation, we're going to jettison or remove that 3 minutes or so from the claw separation. The trunk has solar arrays on it that provides power to the Dragon spacecraft. Is a portion on the spacecraft that holds the trunk to Dragon. Following claw separation, we're going to jettison or really going to do the heavy lifting because it's no longer re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. They come in at 17,500 miles per hour. Now that we're really need to ensure that we need to go ahead and jettison that trunk and able to expose the heat shield, which is really going to do the heavy lifting as Crew 9 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. They come in at 17,500 miles per hour, so they really need to ensure that that heat shield absorbs that heat. And so we did just get communications there that the deorbit sequence start has begun. So here in just a couple minutes from now, we expect to hear information or a call back about the claw separation having begun. And again, that kicks off that trunk separation. And so we did just get communications there that the deorbit sequence start has begun. And then so eventually we'll have minutes from now, we expect to hear and we'll continue information through all of these milestones as we approach them ahead of our splashdown. And again, that kicks off that trunk separation portion that I was discussing this afternoon. To remove that exposed the heat shield, and then eventually we'll have the deorbit burn, and we'll continue to walk you through all of these milestones as we approach them ahead of our splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
In the atmosphere, we're very excited to bring the Crew 9 the heat shield home. Itself is one of my favorite parts of the Dragon capsule. Separation. It is on a trajectory that will re-enter in the atmosphere and break up upon that re-entry on board during the re-entry phase. Is one of my favorite parts outside of the Dragon capsule. It is the workhorse of the re-entry phase. Fahrenheit. It will work to in excess of the Dragon capsule. Meanwhile, the interior of Dragon stays a very during the re-entry phase as that heat shield does a lot of the work, and we'll see that plasma build up on the exterior of the capsule. As a result of the plasma that builds up, we will lose communications with the crew. Meanwhile, the interior of Dragon stays a very comfortable temperature. This is roughly a 10-minute period on average of the capsule. Even less than. As a result of the plasma that builds up, we will lose communications with the crew. 7 minutes known as loss of signal. It kind of depends on the mission, and this is roughly a 10-minute period every Dragon capsule that re-enters the atmosphere. I believe today, due to that plasma buildup, we're not able to communicate or command. Probably about 6 or 7 minutes long. So we stand by while the mission and it happens for every Dragon capsule signal and get atmosphere known as AOS or acquisition buildup. We're not able to communicate or command the capsule, so we
stand by for claw separation, and then we'll look towards trunk separation. It'll be just about a minute or so after that. That happens pretty rapidly in succession. Some of our milestones will take a little bit longer throughout the day. For example, we will have a deorbit burn after that, and then we'll take about 7.5 minutes separation. It'll be just about a minute or so after that. That happens pretty rapidly in succession. Some of our milestones will take a little bit longer throughout the day. For example, we will have a deorbit burn after that will take about 7.5 minutes and helps get Dragon set up in the right trajectory to splash down in the Gulf off the coast of Florida. So continuing to stand by for claw separation.
Nominal trunk jettison.
All right. Great news there. that trunk has been jettisoned from the Dragon capsule. So the cloth was separated. That's the mechanism that connects the telemetry and power between the Dragon capsule and the trunk. Great news there. In order to expose the heat shield been jettisoned from the Dragon capsule. So the cloth was separated. That's the mechanism that connects the telemetry and power. That is great news. The Dragon capsule means that telemetry is in order to expose the heat shield and that the nitrox system is primed for cabin and soup cooling, and the heat shield, like I said, is now exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. That is great news. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through its solar cells and converting that to battery is primed for cabin. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, exposed and ready for really don't need to re-entry. We're coming home and Dragon has gathering energy from the sun through its solar cells and converting that the final battery that Dragon will perform prior to re-entry. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power attitude, and then really don't need to since we're coming home and Dragon has enough time that the forward Dracos, which are the four thrusters located on top of the spacecraft prior to re-entry. It's the last time that they will ignite to deorbit burn attitude, will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown last time that the forward Dracos, which are the four thrusters located on top of the spacecraft, and that will last about 7.5 minutes. The last time that they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory
so deorbit burn is targeted for 2:11 p.m. Central Time, so about 2 minutes from now. As we mentioned, it's going to last about 7.5 minutes again, helping to get Dragon into the precise trajectory to ensure that splashdown occurs in the area that was calculated and where the recovery team is already in place. As we mentioned, it's going to last about 7.5 minutes again today, helping to get Dragon into the precise trajectory to ensure that splashdown occurs today, in the area that was calculated and where the recovery team is already in place and ready. Make sure everything is looking good before the recovery vessel Megan approaches. So that whole recovery process takes about an hour, I would say, today. And we also have what is called fast boats. The time they're on the boat and the crew gets out of the spacecraft, and we'll make sure everything is looking good before the recovery vessel Megan approaches. As Crew 9 returns home. So that whole recovery process takes about an hour, I would say, from the time the crew splashes down to the time they're on the boat and the crew gets out of the capsule, and we'll continue to bring you live coverage through every step of the way today as Crew 9 returns home.
External cameras. So here's an animation. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the pressurized section. One of the great things about being close to the space station and the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those Dragon is on its way home. We don't have those external located. So here's an animation from the sun and turning it into power. The pressurized section. The very top of the capsule is the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those solar panels are located. That nose cone is currently open, soaking up the energy from the sun and turning it into power. Once we get through the very top the final capsule is the nose cone. That is where the Dracos, the forward Dracos are located. That nose cone is currently open, Dragon not closed like we saw in that animation. Once we get through forward hatch, they're located the final maneuverings for the re-entry phase. Go ahead. Will close.
That's right. I was going to mention that the nose cone does open shortly after launch, and it remains open the entire time that Dragon is docked to the International Space Station. So as an example for this particular spacecraft, Freedom, that's right. I was going to mention that the nose cone does open shortly after launch, and it remains open the entire time that Dragon is docked to the International Space Station. So as an example for this particular spacecraft, Freedom, since September when it docked to the International Space Station, remains open that entire time, and here shortly it will close for the very first time since September.
So Dragon, recap of what Dragon has done in the trunk. As we said before, we separated the claw, we released the trunk. Began preparations for re-entry known as the deorbit sequence, meaning maneuver. Dragon will position itself correctly to execute that deorbit burn. As we said before, we separated the claw, we released the trunk. Be facing it forward or first, if you will. We want that to be the leading edge of the Dragon capsule, as that heat shield is meant to maneuver. So it will basically be an ablative material to execute that heat that it will incur. The heat shield, one side to complete that deorbit forward or first, if you will. We want that to be the leading edge of the Dragon capsule, as that heat shield is meant to. That will last for basically be an ablative material that to be the heat that it will start here any moment now. Actually, once we and then complete that deorbit burn about attitude slew we will initiate the deorbit burn itself. That will last for several minutes, expecting that to
and I did hear confirmation that deorbit burn is underway. As we mentioned, it's about a 7.5 minute burn. So within the last 10 minutes, Dragon has jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn just seconds ago. And I did hear confirmation earlier for those operations underway. NASA and as we mentioned, it's about a 7.5 minute burn. So within the last 10 minutes, Dragon has jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn just seconds ago. As mentioned earlier, for those operations, NASA and SpaceX multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance of and during recovery operations and Coast Guard and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, the spacecraft, as well as splashdown on board the returning spacecraft. So we do want to stress to the public that multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance of and during is a hazardous operation, and Coast Guard any other boats interfering increases the risk to not only the astronauts in Dragon, but the teams working to recover them from the water to the public and the safety of those that may come too close. So recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation. Your safety and any other boats interfering increases the risk to bring not only the astronauts in Dragon, but the teams working to recover them from the water and the safety of those that may come too close. So for the safety of the crew, which you see there on your screen, your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we'll continue to bring you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
Dragon Freedom has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site right off the coast, basically meaning at the top of the Dragon capsule. So basically, Dragon Freedom has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn executes and is what really locks it in and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site right off the screen right now. Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, spacecraft perigee. As you can see on your screen right now, Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander are using their screens to, as I mentioned earlier, Dragon is flying itself. The Draco firings and trajectory details such as stay strapped into their seats and perigee, and though I must say, if I had one of those window seats, it would be pretty difficult to restrain myself. As I mentioned earlier, Dragon is flying with Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander ready to deorbit is stay strapped into their seats and keep tabs. They will be heading to one of 8 targeted sites supported by SpaceX. It would be pretty difficult to restrain myself. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of America and Alexander ready to deorbit and splash down. Spreading the supported sites across they will be heading to one of 8 return opportunities for this mission and future crews. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of America. For those of you following along, Atlantic Ocean. You'll know that today's splashdown marks our final Dragon recovery on the maximize the return opportunities for this mission and years of successful recovery operations off the East Coast weather. We'll be moving. For those of you following Dragon recovery, you'll know that today's splashdown marks our final Dragon recovery on the East Coast.
And as always, NASA and SpaceX jointly select our splashdown location. And for today, the prime recovery site is off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. The selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory or path that it follows, select our landing sites are available, and how favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the selection process for the returning a lot of different variables, as well as the space station's orbital trajectory or path that it follows, what landing sites are available, and how favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedules for the returning crew members, as well as, of course, the big one, the weather.
Site can vary from we'll start with calculating daily return options based off getting home the station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus-hour days for less than 6 hours to more than 39. Trajectory and ballistic getting home the quickest comes with daily obvious benefits, but opportunities that would line up Dragon properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus-hour days for them. Of course.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternative sites while in a free flight if Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of constantly looking at lowering the final call and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternative sites. We looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are maybe rain or a chance of lightning in the recovery zone. Weather is something we're constantly looking at, making the crew inside Dragon about 2.5 hours before the crew in the water. So and for the Crew 9 return, we looked at a number of weather items. 15 feet some of the obvious ones are about 10 miles per hour, of lightning in the recovery zone, calm seas for the safety of the crew inside Dragon and the recovery teams, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship. And we're also looking for wind speeds and Alexander 15 feet per second. Once Dragon began flying today, we had a number of additional checkpoints so that we can safely execute recovery operations, head to the alternate landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly weather data. Sunny, Butch, and Alexander happened all the way up until we were in the final hours flying today. We had a number of additional just about a minute or so left in it, and this is the primary site. Burn and the trip to the alternate or select a re-entry based on real-time weather data. These checkpoints happened all the way up until we were in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which has just about a minute or so left in it. And this is the last burn in the trip home that commits Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Burn, which will confirm completion of that deorbit burn for Dragon conclude the deorbit burn. We've got less than a minute until that finishes. Images there. We will expect to hear a call out for nominal display panels, which the crew utilizes in flight of that deorbit. The visualization of exactly which one of the four forward Draco thrusters are firing. Images there. That's why you have kind of like a strobe effect there. Display panels that the crew utilizes in flight. We can see the visualization of exactly
and if you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of the Dragon Freedom. On your left is Commander of Crew 9, Nick Hague. To his right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grabenkin. And if you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of the Dragon Freedom. And then also on your left capsule today is NASA astronaut Nick Hague. To his right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander that their deorbit burn is complete, which is the last burn that's going to excuse me, that is Alexander Gorbanov to splash down. And then also in the capsule today is NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. We are awaiting confirmation that their deorbit burn is complete, which is the last burn that's going to help set them up on a trajectory to splash down off the coast of Florida. We were looking for nominal burn, so that means that that deorbit burn was successful and nominal, meaning as expected, and we're now beginning to close the nose cone. Excellent news there. We heard the words we were looking for, nominal burn, so that means that that deorbit burn in the background, Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone shut for re-entry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox in the background, Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used during re-entry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes from now. The nose cone shut at this point, the nose cone is closing, and the vehicle has initiated the nitrox, and the crew are using their screens to continue to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done during re-entry, and as we mentioned earlier, that nose cone has remained open since September, so this is the first time is closing and protecting the forward hatch for re-entry, and the crew are using their screens to continue to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks, and as we mentioned earlier, that nose cone has remained open since September, so this is the first time it's closing in a few months. Who is seated in that room that you see there on your screen. Now, that entry will be expecting, as I mentioned before, a entry for anticipated splashdown as well as again, that's the crew operation or period of resource engineer who is seated in that room, who will also give us information such as wind speed and wave height, provide updated times for anticipated splashdown as well. Everything has been great today. All events have been executed on time as expected, and we will also give us information such as wind speed and wave height at the expected splashdown at about 5:57 p.m. But all in all, everything has been great today. All events have been executed between now and expected, and we are looking forward to moving quite quickly. In fact, if anything, at about this 5:57 p.m. Eastern time, slower part of the re-entry phase. We're going to go through, like I said, that period of loss of signal. Things are going to start moving quite quickly. That period is a few minutes, if anything, where we are unable to communicate or command the capsule due to the plasma builds up on the entry phase. Of the capsule. We're going to go through, like I said, that period
like I said, lasts for a couple minutes or LOS. You will start to hear that period is a few minutes long, where we are unable a little bit earlier than expected because we in the past have actually regained communications a couple minutes earlier. That period, like I said, lasts for a couple minutes. You will start through that period of loss of signal, that entry period that a little bit earlier than expected because we in the past have actually regained communications a couple minutes earlier than initially anticipated. At about, we'll go through that period 18,000 feet when the capsule is traveling at 350 miles per hour. When the capsule, we will see our first views of parachutes for the day. It's one of my favorite moments. Approximately at about return sequences is when we get to see the capsule is traveling at 350 miles per hour. Those drogues will help slow the vehicle down to about 119 miles per hour. It's one of my favorite moments of main parachutes of return sequences is when we come out from the drogue parachute, the Dragon spacecraft, the drogues come out. Those drogues will help slow the vehicle down to about 119 miles per hour.
And we are hearing confirmation that the nose cone is closed and everything was nominal or as expected with that closure. So as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject cooled and we are hearing confirmation that the nose cone is closed and everything was nominal or as expected. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable. The second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject Fahrenheit as they re-enter into the air, being delivered to the heat shield is pointing forward by Nick, Sunny, leading Dragon to the landing site. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So the heat shield is pointing forward,
the first gen
leading Dragon to the landing site.
By NASA for studying and sampling heat shield within Dragon's primary heat shield is
SpaceX
comprised
partnered
of
with
Pika
NASA
3.0,
to develop
which
Pika
stands
X,
for
which was
phenolic
the second
impregnated
generation
carbon
product
ablator.
used on all
The first gen
Dragon 1
Pika was
cargo
initially
resupply
developed by
service
NASA
missions
for
that
studying and
resupplied
sampling
the International
comets within
Space
our
Station
solar
on 20
system.
missions. Pika 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply service missions that allowed the heat shield to be Space Station on 20 even more effective in the way that it was developed, utilized the ability to on Dragon 2 crew and cargo with enhanced structural and thermal capabilities that allowed the heat shield to be even more effective in the way that it utilized the ability to make that heat ablevate as it goes through the Earth's atmosphere.
The remainder of Dragon is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection which is lighter weight versus Pika and protects the underlying composite structure during Dragon is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative
While Dragon
material.
will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees during peak reentry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection system coupled with the environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior Dragon will experience temperatures well over Alexander 3,000 degrees during peak reentry conditions. The characteristics of the thermal protection system coupled with the environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior will ensure that Nick, Sunny, Butch, and Alexander stay cool and comfortable during all phases of reentry through splashdown.
So, now if you've just recently joined us, we hope to regain views after Dragon Freedom has inside Dragon Freedom a series of parachutes we don't have those available at the moment due to ground station coverage. So, parachutes. We'll bring those back to you as soon as main parachutes. Now, after those Dragon Freedom has its first contact with atmosphere, since a series of parachutes will deploy to Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the spacecraft detect that they're at the right speed and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with
at drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 18,000
when
feet.
different
Now, when
pressure and
the vehicle
positioning
velocity
sensors
at
on the
main deploy
spacecraft
is
detect
approximately
they're at the right speed
119
and
miles per
altitude.
hour, and they deploy at about 6,500 feet. At drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles in the water. The vehicle velocity will be about 16 miles per hour. Now, so when you can really see how the main deploy is approximately 100 inside the capsule per hour, the highest yield the crew is expected to experience today is When 3 to 5 Dragon splashes down in the water, the vehicle velocity will be about 16 miles per hour, so you can really see how those parachutes help to slow down the crew inside the capsule. The highest G load the crew is expected to experience today is about 3 to 5 Gs.
Those Gs. Yeah, when you think about, they go through really much fun roller coasters. They're about in that
and so
range,
we are continuing to make our way through a number of milestones today. We did have trunk separation.
Well equipped to experience those Gs. It's nothing for them. They go through much more intense training.
And so we are continuing to make our way through
all right, great news there.
A number of milestones today. We did have trunk separation.
Final physical configuration change for Dragon is complete. We have closed that nose cone. This is the last physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. It's important that that nose cone is completely great news there, because that tells underneath us that is not only where final physical forward configuration located for Dragon, but it's also because that is where the forward hatch is located. That nose cone. That is the hatch that is utilized physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to from the station, prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Capsules it's important that nose cone is completely closed, because underneath it is not only space flights. We want to make sure that all of the integrity of that hardware remains intact. But it's also because that is where the forward hatch is located. That is the hatch that is utilized. We're going to start moving pretty quickly here. As I mentioned from the station, we'll go through while it is docked signal, and we'll get that signal back several minutes later, and then we'll see the parachute action, and we reuse them on future space flights. We want to make sure that all of the integrity
we're targeting Tallahassee as our splashdown zone today at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now, you did mention the call to the crew. They'll do some additional calculations following that burn and potentially let us know if that splashdown time has changed at all. But right now, we are continuing to target 2:57 p.m. And that's all ahead of splashdown off the coast of Florida. And you can see there on your screen a path of where Dragon will be re-entering today. 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now, you did mention the call to the crew to see Dragon some additional calculations following that splashdown. You potentially let us know if that splashdown time has changed. Potentially, you'll have the opportunity but right now we are continuing to target 2:57 p.m. And you can see there on your screen a path of where Dragon will be re-entering today. So if you are in the southern tip of Mexico, you might have the opportunity to see Dragon. Because it's a daytime splashdown, you probably won't have too great of views, but potentially you'll have the opportunity to get a glimpse of it there.
That person is the voice that we have heard multiple times and will continue to hear as the primary operators contact to monitoring the progress of Dragon through this re-entry phase. Dragon Freedom. That is SpaceX Mission Control. We will also hear the voice of Commander Nick Hague. Basically, also where after the crew operations and resource engineer is communicate something, that we will hear Nick Hague, the voice that we have heard multiple times and that they heard the message as the primary point of sort of recognition that the message was received to the crew on board Dragon Freedom. We will also
and if you joined us yesterday for our coverage during the undocking, we were communicating through something that's called a big loop. We do that when we are in integrated operations with the international.
Indicate that they copy, that they heard the message well, some sort of recognition that the message was received.
And if you joined us yesterday for our coverage during the undocking, we were communicating through something that's called a big loop. We do that when we're in integrated operations with the international.
And our splashdown time is the same per your displays, 2157. All right, I've got some updated times for you. Our COM blackout start time is 2144. Our COM blackout end time is 2151. And our splashdown time is the same per your displays. That's a good readback, 57. And with that, please report when tablets are secured behind the elastic bands, restraints are tight, and visors are down.
Okay. COM blackout start 2144, copy 2151, splashdown per display.
That's a good readback. And with that, please report when tablets are secured behind the
And
elastic
with that
bands,
communication
restraints are
from the
tight,
Corps or
and
Crew
visors are down.
Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague of Crew Dragon Freedom, we did hear that the loss of signal period is still at 2:44 p.m. Pacific, but we had a 1-minute adjustment to the acquisition of signal. That's going to now be at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. However, our splashdown time remains the same at 2:57 from the Corps or Crew Operations Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne to Commander Nick Hague of Crew Dragon Freedom. We did hear that the loss of signal period is still at 2:44 p.m. Pacific, but we had a 1-minute adjustment to the acquisition of signal. That's going to now be at 2:51 p.m. Pacific time. However, our splashdown time remains the same at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
Due to best recovery conditions there, as Dragon continues to make its way home. It's always a watch item, but everything, as we mentioned before, we are splashing down on the Gulf Coast. So we have, I'm sure, once we ability to splash down on either side of Florida, but the location site, I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty beautiful site that was selected today due to best
and we did mention that, of course, this is a daylight splashdown, so we should be getting some great views. We do have a couple of spacecraft called the WB-57, which are high-altitude planes that NASA utilizes during splashdown operations. Those are en route and going to be tracking the capsule as it makes its way through the atmosphere and should be providing some good views for us. And we did mention that, of course, this is a daylight we haven't had a daytime splashdown in a little while, so we're looking forward to the views along with you. We do have a couple of spacecraft called the WB-57, which are high-altitude planes that NASA utilizes during splashdown operations. Those are en route and going to be tracking the capsule as it makes its way through the atmosphere and should be providing some good views for us. Kate and I were just chatting about how we haven't had a daytime splashdown in a little while, so we're looking forward to the views along with you.
A little bit easier for the team themselves. Nighttime views are also great their work in daytime capsule at night, streaking through the night sky. We'll see them rush in quite brightly. So a couple of Sandra, you said earlier, daylight will be a little bit less bright, but of the Dragon capsule, we will definitely be able to see this retrieving the parachutes from the surface of the ocean. I could also imagine it's probably a little bit easier for the team themselves to make its way do their work in daytime than at nighttime, a couple miles away from. We'll see them rush in from really quickly with a couple of fast boats as they begin the initial safety checks, and so it takes a little while for that vessel to make its way over. But once it's closer, we'll have even better views. The recovery vessels, the main recovery vessel will continue.
And you may be wondering why sometimes we splash down in the daytime versus the nighttime. And believe me, we would all love for these operations to happen during regular daytime working hours.